Hong Kong, a city known for its history of being both British and Chinese, its important place in the world as a financial and industrial hub, and also for its high density. A density achieved throughout the use of high-rises and skyscrapers. Hong Kong is, in fact, the city with the most skyscrapers in the world, with an impressive number of 553 skyscrapers and counting. However, if you take a look at Europe's most dense areas, you will find that they achieve their density not out of height, but out of densely expanding outwards. Of course, you will see the expected ones: Paris and its suburbs, Barcelona, Athens, Naples. A 692 people city takes the second place, as it's not even a tenth of a square kilometer and we find ourselves on a 2 popes per square kilometer problem. But the one I want to focus on is the one that occupies the 28th place. Not only because 28 is my favorite number, but also because it's kind of an odd exception. On a list full of big important capitals or tiny islands, it's a peninsula. A peninsula that houses a city not that different from Hong Kong, a financial and industrial hub for its region and a high density achieved through high rises. A density that's very noticeable. Have a look at this map of population density in Spain and notice that the most densely populated area is located here. But how did we end here? Around 2000 years ago, the Roman Empire had put its eyes on the peninsula in which the peninsula that we are going to talk about is located because it was full of minerals, slaves, and because it had made the fatal mistake of being colonized by the Carthaginians. After around 3 centuries of wars, it was finally being conquered, and with conquest comes colonizing, aka Romanization. So around the 1st century before Jesus was born, this guy, Decimo Junio Bruto Galaico, decided that it was a good idea to have a port to help the Roman conquest of these lands, so he founded the city of Brigantium here. Well, actually that's not true, as no one really knows where Brigantium was located, resulting in a local dispute today between the city of Coruña and the Concello of Betanzos, but it doesn't matter because in the 10th century the Moors destroyed the city, already damaged by Viking raids. That's right, baby, getting colonized not once, not twice, but 3 times. I wonder where did Spain take inspiration to colonize all of Latin America? In 1208, however, Alfonso IX decided to remake the city and grant it great economical privileges, making it grow. Thanks to the help that the city got from the crown, it decided to name itself Crown in Latin, Coruña, and that's how you get today's Coruña. However, it did not get recognized as a city until 1446, and some years later, Charles I of Spain was leaving the city to become Charles V of Germany. His son decided that he really hated the English, which is a feeling that I can understand, so he sent from the city the Armada Invencible, the invincible navy, which was pretty much invincible and got completely destroyed. As revenge, the English pillaged the city, but a woman that was pretty tired of the Englishmen killing her husbands decided to kill Sir Francis Drake's brother with the very same flag he was holding. And today we praise her as a local hero. During the Napoleonic Wars, the city was home to a huge battle between the English and the French. God, we do have a history with the English. And England lost. And it's only after the Napoleonic Wars that the city became cemented as a fundamental city in Spain. That is, whenever Spain wasn't falling apart. After a period of slow but steady growth, the city found itself pretty wealthy, and it was actually a hub for culture and transit between the old and new worlds. It's in this context of cultural interchange that, when commissioned to build an office building for a local bank, Antonio Tenreiro thinks big. Influenced by the Chicago way of doing things, he envisions the first skyscraper not only for the city or the region, but for the whole country. But like most cities from its time, Coruña had a height limit normative in place, limiting new buildings' height to 20 meters. That doesn't mean that there weren't any 10 meters plus buildings in the city. Most famously, the Hercules Tower, the only Roman lighthouse still in use to this day, was the city's pride with a height of 49 meters. But notice the lack of other tall buildings. Usually in European cities the highest building historically was the cathedral, but Cathedral Coruña has not. This will be important later. But law is something that often can stop banks from getting what they want, so almost doubling the height limit, voila, the Banco Pastor de Coruña building. Número 1, and only, in Spain's skyscrapers list from 1925 to 1929. The height fever is here, darling, and there is no stopping it. Once we have our very own skyscraper, this is just the beginning. After 40 meters, we will go for 60, then 100, then 1,000. After the Civil War, Spain was devastated and impoverished. The 40s and 50s were time of scarcity and very, very slowly rebuilding. However, during the 60s, economic growth came back to the city, with the opening of new industrial centers and the general economic growth brought by the opening of Spain to the world, the city was ready to grow in all senses. And the city's official architect knew exactly how. On 1965, Santiago Rey Pedreira kickstarted the race for big buildings, and after 1967, when the new normative for building was put in place, a lot of them start popping out everywhere, as long as you think of everywhere as the city center. Building after building after building, a new height is reached, and we house the 20th, no the 16th, no the 3rd highest building. Coruña is here to stay, and nothing can revoke her of her status as a world. In 1976, an economic crisis hit Spain, and the city decided that the big buildings were now a no, so a height limit was put back, effectively killing the skyscraper movement. However, 9 years of the urbanistic plan had already passed, and it had a great impact on Coruña still to this day. Unlike most cities in the US, Coruña's highest buildings are almost all residential, as the height rush wasn't a dick measuring contest between companies, but an honest effort to give people more homes to live in and to redevelop the land. And it worked, remember. Coruña still holds as one of the most densely populated areas in Europe, and it's one of the places where the current house price crisis isn't that bad. It's still bad though. And also, the big densification without a transit plan made the city one of the most congested in Europe. So, with that in mind, let's have a little top 11 highest buildings, shall we? What do you mean, why 11? 10 places away from the number 1 spot and with a height of 65 meters is the Efisa building. Built in 1977, building had started while the law was in place, by Alfonso del Moral. Today it's placed to a bingo, more than 300 families, and is also one of the most characteristic buildings of the city, as it rests on one of the principal arteries of transit. The 10th place goes to the Emerald Tower, a beautiful building from 1971 and designed by Antonio Rodríguez Losada Turlock. It was the first residential building to have more than 10 stories. Also, when it was around halfway done, it didn't have a license. But don't worry, it has one now, I think. On number 9 is the Crystal Tower, and one of the few non-residential buildings of the city. This building is one of your typical skyscrapers, full of offices and on the suburbs of the city. It's mostly covered in glass. As the previous two, it has 65 meters. On number 8 is the Coruña Tower, one of those buildings that Rey Pedreira, that's the architect from before, used to popularize high-rises. Finished in 1966, is a residential tower, and it's the final one tied on the 65-meter mark. Also from 1966, and Rey Pedreira, is the Riazor Tower with its 70 meters. With beautiful views to the sea, it's not surprising to note that Luis Seoane, an important Galician writer and painter, decided to live here. Sixth on this list is the Golden Tower, built in 1965 by Milagros Rey Hombre. Out of all the buildings in the city, this is definitely one of the most important. Why? Because it is kind of a symbol of the decadence of the Franquist regime and the advance of social rights. It was built by a woman that, might be the daughter of Santiago Rey Pedreira, but she also was the third woman from all of Spain to get a degree in architecture. And at one point, the construction of the building was paralyzed because, and I quote, "There is a clear lack of love for the motherland by making use of Soviet methods to make a building." Why? Because Milagros had used a method to calculate the building weight stress developed in Soviet Russia. The building itself is a masterpiece, with its characteristic golden outline, its very own public plaza, and just a very pleasant looking shape. Entering the top 5 is the Torre Golpe, literally meaning hit tower, the building that served as inspiration to all other buildings on this list, as it was built in 1965, the oldest on the list. The architect is our usual friend Santiago Rey Pedreira, and it has great views to the city port. One place away from the top 3 is Torres y Sáez building, a residential building built by a steel company as a flex of how strong and safe was their steel. It was finished in 1964 and designed by none other than Rey Pedreira, and this is his biggest building. Before we get to the top 3, let me have some honorary mentions. The Hercules Tower with its 49 meters, it was built more than 2000 years ago, but it was rebuilt in the 18th century, and it's a World Heritage Site. Also related to maritime traffic, the Maritime Control Tower. It was built after the Aegean Sea tragedy, which was an accident where the sea caught fire once. Whoops! It was finished in 1995 and has 80 meters, which places it as the 4th biggest structure in the city, and it houses the Capitanía Marítima de A Coruña and the local rescue services. The copper goes to the Galicia Tower, haha, it's ugly. Designed by Manuel Gallego Jorreto and finished in 1968, its placement is actually a little bit far away from the rest of the city's skyscrapers. Also, don't confuse it with the Galicia Central Tower. That building is actually pretty and in Buenos Aires. The silver goes to this beast of a building finished in 1973 and envisioned by Carlos Mejide Calvo. The building, called the Treble Tower, is actually two towers joined together in some kind of diabolical architectural move. Founded by the Cooperativa de Alféreces Provisionales, it's basically a whole block on a building with commercial parts and even fountains. It has an impressive 90 meters and some of its houses have more than 250 meters squared for housing big families. And if you look just behind the Treble Tower, you will see the behemoth that is the Hercon Tower, also known as Costa Rica Tower, as it is placed on that street. Built between 1972 and 1975, reaching its maximum height on Halloween of 1974, it was designed by José Antonio Franco Taboada, which, fun fact, also designed this building, the Cultural Center of Arteixo. The building was paid for by the Cooperativa de Alféreces Provisionales, and to this day it's still the biggest building in Galicia and 25 in Spain, although it was number 3 when it was built. On its 119 meters, it has 5 floors dedicated to commercial, and then a lot of residential floors, and in the last floor it was going to have a restaurant, but the idea was scrapped. But these 11 buildings are in Coruña's only tall buildings, and if you go to the city you'll soon realize that it actually has a lot of tall buildings. It has so many, in fact, that on a ranking of average building height, it places first in Spain with an average of 5.15 floors. But why is that? Well, the 1967 plan, that's for sure, but why did Coruña approve such a permissive plan when European cities tend to have more restrictive regulations? Well, for starters, as we mentioned, there was a little height tradition in the city with both the Hercules Tower and Banco Pastor, but the main reason is that Coruña is narrow, very narrow. There are only 300 meters from seaside to seaside at the narrowest point, meaning that most times going outwards, the usual approach other European cities had, wasn't an option, meaning that the only option to keep growing was to go upwards. And also, on a lot of old cities, the church always pressured the local government so that their cathedral stayed as the biggest building. Like for example on Santiago de Compostela, another Galician city, where still to this day no building is bigger than 12 stories to allow the important cathedral to be seen from everywhere in the city. Meanwhile, in Coruña, this is the biggest church. Not very tall, is it? However, it will appear that Coruña's 60s and 70s tower have become their own cathedral, as when in 2002 a new development plan for this area of the city was proposed, which included a very modern-looking skyscraper of 180 meters, which at the time would have been the second highest in Spain, and while the at the time mayor, who was very worried about leaving his mark on the city for some reason, gave the tower the green light, concerns of its height, damaging precious views of the city, became louder and louder, and at the end the project was scaled down to become an A-history building with a lot of it was suspended because people didn't want new houses on their backyard, and nothing has been built to this day. Oh wow, I really hate NIMBYs. However, Coruña still isn't done with big buildings, but before we can talk about that, we need to talk about the flower neighborhood. This is Alfonso Molina, one of, if not the most important entrance to the city, both by car and by train. Today, around 30,000 people will pass through this road or throughout the rail line that goes adjacent to it. But this wasn't always the case. The importance of Alfonso Molina comes after a project to convert the road on the main city entrance, a development project that saw the construction of lots and lots of social housing. These buildings, inspired by the height fever, have been built with a considerable height, meaning that to this day, if you go there, you will find residential towers that were designed to densify the city. This project was a huge success, and when other development projects were proposed adjacent to the flower neighborhood, like Mato Grande or the Ofimatic Park, they were built with density in mind. Especially influenced by it was the neighborhood of Someso, a development project that was paralyzed for more or less 10 years. It's where all the new buildings are, and following the traditional Coruña style, they're all residential. But Coruña might be leaving its residential love behind, as 2 new towers are expected to be finished sometime. With this type of thing, you never know when the project is just going to get delayed, paralyzed, or just outright cancelled. One of these towers, the lowest one, will of course be residential, but the higher will be the offices of the Caixa de Ahorro de Galicia. That's right, baby. History truly does repeat itself, as a bank will once again build the highest skyscraper of the city. Well, actually, we don't know if it will be the new rooftop of the city. How tall will it be, I hear you ask? Well, most sources put them at 119 plus minus 1 meter. Yep, we don't know if they will be 1 meter shorter or taller than the Hercon Tower, meaning that they could be the tallest buildings in the city or just a little tiny bit small. Also, one of my sources says that one tower will be 157 meters, but I couldn't find any reliable source to back that up, so who knows. So, to wrap things up, a portuary city that's limited to its road by cliffs and the sea decided to go up instead of out, and now finds itself as one of the most densely populated areas of Europe. With a great history of big buildings, it may or may not be seeing a renaissance in its architectural style. We will have to wait and see, I guess. Well, most sources put them at 119 más... No, más no, es en español.